Hello, and thank you for logging on to the Foundation for Physician Advancement podcast channel in partnership with Convey Med. FPA is a nonprofit built for and run by Marney Reid and a group of dedicated physician educators. Our mission is to help physicians build a successful practice in today's healthcare setting through the development of your leadership skills and business acumen. I'm Marney Reid, Executive Director, and we hope you enjoy today's discussion. Thank you for joining us for the second of our four-part series on private equity and orthopedics. Like every industry, there's a large amount of jargon associated with it, and private equity is no exception. Wading through the myriad of terms, acronyms, and processes can be quite daunting, and probably one of the reasons why a lot of orthopedic surgeons, who especially have had their head down for decades in patient care, might be shying away from sitting down at the table and having these conversations. So today we're going to unpack the terminology, the deal flow process, and specific areas that surgeons should be aware of. You don't have to be able to sit down and go through a pro forma or talk about a deal model, but just have an idea of what to expect and how it could affect the business side of your practice should you decide to take on a PE-backed sponsor. So before we get started, thank you to our amazing panelists for your insight and participation. Could you please introduce yourself to our listeners?
Great. Hi, everybody. Marney, thank you so much for having us. This is Dana Jacoby. I'm the founder and CEO of Vector Medical Group, and Vector was really created to help physicians architect their futures. We started with, I had done medical market research all over the world for some of the largest companies in healthcare, GE and J&J and Allergan, and then had the luxury of selling a business to a private equity and realized at that time that the mission for Vector and for myself was to really help doctors architect their futures. So that was a lot of deals ago, but I'm looking forward to the conversation, and I'm excited to partner with the physicians on this call to help educate other people in their specialty about what they should be thinking about moving forward.
Thanks so much. And I'm Mike Ast. I'm a joint replacement surgeon up at HSS in New York City, where I also serve as our Chief Medical Innovation Officer, as well as the president of our Ambulatory Surgery Center Development Network. And just super happy to be here because I think this is a really important topic for us and our colleagues.
Thanks, Marty, for putting this together. My name is Chad Krueger. I'm a hip and knee replacement surgeon at the Rothman Institute in Philadelphia. Having done a lot of work on health policy and research in that regard, private equity certainly falls into that scope, and I'm excited to talk about that tonight with everyone on this recording.
Hi, everyone. I'm Bryan Springer. I'm a hip and knee surgeon in Charlotte, North Carolina at Ortho Carolina. Excited to be on the call. Our group does not have any specific affiliation with private equity, although we have had serious conversations. And I also serve as our fellowship director. And much of our interest or questions that we get from this is actually our fellows going out into the marketplace looking for jobs. So excited to listen, learn, and share some experiences around private equity.
Hey, my name is Gary Stewart. Thank you for letting me join on this panel. I'm a foot and ankle specialist with Resurgence Orthopedics in Atlanta. I am currently the South Region Clinical Governance Board member, director of our Resurgence Foot and Ankle Center, and co-chair of our Resurgence Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee. I believe I'm on because we just did a deal about a year ago with Welsh, Carson, Anderson, and Stowe, and I hope to be able to add some insight to this topic.
Dana, having sat in on meetings with development and mergers and acquisitions teams for a very short time, I got the opportunity to observe various phases of sourcing, development, and due diligence process. However, as our subject matter expert, could you please walk us through the various steps of a PE orthopedic practice deal?
Yeah, no, and people overcomplicate this, Marney. It's really very easy. There's really three phases when you look at kind of the overview of a transaction or a private equity discussion. And the first phase is really, I call it transaction exploration and preparation. And so this is really where the group or whatever entity is looking to possibly start to do something with a private equity or think about a private equity partner, or frankly, any partner, is going to just start education and discussion of the transaction process. And so just very much like we're doing on this podcast, talk a little bit about what the initial due diligence could look like. Are they going to need a quality of earnings, which basically just means, are they going to look at the overall financials and need to get a quality of earnings on their overall platform? And then they really want to start to put together a universe of suitors of who their potential suitors could or would be. And some of them they may already know. Some of them may be folks that have already reached out to them. I think in orthopedics, I'm shocked sometimes that, 2 or 3 suitors have already reached out by the time I get a call that, hey, we might want to do something. And then you start to put together marketing materials as far as your group is concerned or your orthopedic practice is concerned. And you would, kind of do an exclusive look with a handful of suitors. And that would include non-disclosure agreements, obviously, where people would protect the data that was given. But a lot of times it's an anonymized look and maybe some preemptive fireside chats with potential suitors. So that's kind of phase one. And at that point, you get to a point where usually pretty quickly you start with a lot of suitors and you get down to a handful of suitors that you think might be the right person or people. And then you start to go for what's called indications of interest or letters of intent, where you basically go into a first round basis of, would you want to date these guys to the next level? And then you get to a smaller group. At that point, you would start some more serious suitor discussions. You might have some on-site management presentations with the various partners or various folks from the private equity. And that's where you really get down to a possible negotiation. Maybe you have 2 or 3 suitors at that point, where you might have a formal letter of intent or a long form letter of intent where you get into an exclusive with one partner or party. And then you really move from that point. And I should say, before I go forward, at each one of these phases, so at phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3, you always have a go, no go opportunity. So it's not like you immediately, when you start the first process, you're married. You really get to kind of have this dating opportunity. And when you get to the letter of intent, it's almost like a prenup. You really have this entire soup to nuts discussion about what this could look like if you were going to go to the next level. And then phase 3 is really where you go into more confirmatory due diligence. So now you're really in it. You're really, showing the suitor and comparing notes on both sides of what this could actually look like if you were to get married. You negotiate and finalize the definitive agreements, and then have a partnership vote, hopefully, to proceed. And then it ends up being a close, and you get a wire transfer and closing documents and finalize the deal. But it's really an easy roadmap of a phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 process that people tend to make more complicated just because the terminology makes it something that isn't always easy to understand.
That's fair. It's like the Bridgerton of orthopedics, although since this is for orthopedics, I don't think anyone is going to understand that except those that claim that their wife makes them watch it. It's a wonderful show on Netflix, folks. I like that Dr. Krueger was the first to laugh. That means Alicia's been making him watch it. It's a great show. It really is.
Hey, Marney.
Season 1. Yes.
If I hear what Dana's saying correctly, from a physician standpoint, I think what was said earlier is we tend to be a little bit intimidated by this and kind of turn away from it. But Dana, as you're saying, is that you, as a physician, you don't really need an MBA to understand this. There's a lot of resources out there. I think the biggest challenge, I think, is for our residents and fellows trying to learn about this as they go out into the marketplace. And kudos for Marney and FPA for these are some of the most popular segments at our meetings that we have. And I know in talking to you before, some of your most popular speaking engagements are going into residency programs, right? And talking to residents and fellows about what all this could mean.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think it's the nature of just, when they're going out and even doing rounds, they're hearing about this. And last year, taught in double-digit med schools on this topic and honestly had never been asked to teach on this topic before. It used to be the business of medicine, and I got 30 minutes. Now it's a half a day on what does this look like? And I think some of it is just the function of the changes that are happening so quickly across the specialty. But No, I agree. I think for every single group or hospital to get educated, because this is changing the way we practice medicine, and whether you're pro or anti or for or against any of this stuff, it's more getting educated about the shifts and trends that are changing the way that we practice healthcare. So I agree 100%. I think it's a really important thing for every single doctor to get educated about the terminology. And you definitely do not need an MBA. I think some people talk way over where they should. It's not a difficult process once you kind of get to see it. But I encourage everybody, and thank you to Marney again for hosting this, but to really, read the case studies and see kind of some of the terminology. And it's easier to understand than folks think.
Well, I think that part of it is that so many of us, we obviously go to school for a very long time, and you end up collecting people. You collect folks from undergrad that may have gone into finance, and maybe folks that have gone into business school. And so there's some curbside opinions that occur that can kind of complicate things. And so, it is helpful, I think, to kind of give an example of what we went through, because it is complicated to a degree, but it is simple. If you have someone like Dana that can kind of break it down and translate for you, or if we have kind of a management team like we did that had M&A kind of experience, one of the things that we did to help physicians understand was that we created a private equity steering committee. And this was a set of representatives that represented the entire group of our, 95 physician group at the time. This had diversity, tenure, and subspecialty were all reflected in this group. We were charged with diving into kind of a deep understanding of the pros and cons of PE and who were good and bad PE groups. We had our meetings kind of broken up, so it wasn't all just 1 or 5 or 10 siloed folks. It wasn't just all the older folks in the practice or all the younger folks. That way you didn't have silos of information. Communication between your physician partners is very important during this, because like I alluded to earlier, rumors abound. I mean, the gossip about what is happening financially with these meetings would just could kill a deal that might be good for your group, or make you get into a bad deal that is not good for your group. But one of the things that we had when we went into this process is that we had some must-haves. And you have to have a plan. You have to be the driver in this if you're a physician group, or the business people will take over. I mean, nature abhors a vacuum. We all heard that cliche. But our must-haves were, we had to maintain our clinical autonomy. That was number 1 on our list. We had to maintain our culture, our clinical reputation. Physicians had to maintain their role in key decision-making. No deal can be made without the physician's approval. There had to be a pathway, to Bryan's point, to equity ownership for future physician hires. It ends up that the younger and mid-career physicians are the people who are really driving this growth. And so you have to have some type of pathway where they can be a part of the financial bite. We wanted to maintain our physician comp model. We didn't want the business folks to come in and say, this is what we're getting paid. Diversity, equity, inclusion is very important. We wanted to make sure that our private equity partner felt this way. It's actually easier. The business people seem to understand DEI a lot better than orthopedics does. We wanted to have some management team and employee protections and a reasonable restrictive covenants. And so having a game plan going into these meetings, having the steering committee who was communicating with our large group, really kind of helped us cut through what could have easily been derailed and maybe not have happened, when I think this has been positive for us as of right now. This was important. And I think that could be kind of a template, even if you have someone like Dana involved, to have a game plan to be successful in this.
And Dana, is that something, what Gary just described, is that something you've seen with successful partnerships between groups in PEs, kind of a steering committee and going forward? I'm sure obviously it varies based on group size and so forth, but typically if you put 10 orthopedic surgeons in a room, you're going to get 20 different opinions and no agreements on anything.
Only 20?
No.
Yeah, at least.
Is that with 5 surgeons?
It depends how strong the
exactly.
personalities are, which, luckily we're all very soft. So, how outside of that model, what else have you seen to kind of help the group figure out kind of what it wants, especially when you're dealing with group sizes that are 50, 60, group practices, or maybe even bigger than that?
Absolutely. Yeah, no, Chad, you ask a great question. I mean, we, a lot of times for the larger groups or larger entities, absolutely. We say, hey, let's form a committee. If you have a strong cohort of younger doctors, you may want to form a committee of younger doctors that want to vet through this, because obviously it affects everybody's livelihood. But that's something that comes up a lot of times is, hey, should we have a young doctor committee, or should we have a committee? I have a situation right now where we have a board that we are literally just talking about the proceeds part of the transaction. We have a board dedicated to just that aspect. So, the interesting thing about just transactions in general, but if you have good systems in place and good decision making, you're going to have an easier go at this than you do if you all of a sudden are trying to structure something from the ground up in the middle of it. So, you have 12 doctors and 25 opinions. Well, that's going to be a really hard decision. And if you look at it from the investor side of the equation, if you don't have a system in place, or you don't set up a committee, or you don't have a quarterback of the communication, it just gets really wonky really fast, and it looks like you're disjointed. So, before you even get into phase one of this, if you can really think through where the gaps are in your leadership team, where the gaps are in your communication team, where the gaps are in your systems, your templates, your tools, your records, going in before you're in it, because once you're in a negotiation, all of a sudden people can use that lack of sophistication against you. So absolutely on the committee, but I think it's also solving for, if you have to make a decision as a group in a short window of time with an outside entity that may not be at the blades of grass level like all of you are, how do you show yourself to be the most sophisticated platform and communication leadership system that you can, so that that's what the outside investor or buyer sees from inception? Some of the deals that don't go so well, you just have a lot of folks running around instead of running in chorus, and that makes a big, big difference in the overall negotiation.
Hey, now Dana, you just used a word platform, and we've heard that a couple times so far, the concept of platform versus bolt-on practices. And Gary, your group Resurgence was the platform partnership group for the Welsh Carson deal when you guys made United Musculoskeletal Partners. Would you mind just defining that for people who are listening? Like, what is a platform partner and what is a bolt-on? And maybe Dana, you can kind of fill in kind of ways you've heard people explain this well, so that people listening can really understand what that means.
And I would also add in there what a tuck-in, because I'm not familiar with that term myself. So go ahead.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Gary, do you want to start and I'll chime in?
Sure, yes. So, a platform group, which is what Resurgence was, thank you, Mike, is typically considered the first in, or the founding group of the practice. It can vary from PE investor and group, but we felt that the benefits of being the platform group included having a leadership position, a chance to influence and build a strong relationship with the leadership of the MSO, making sure that we were able to get those must-haves that I described earlier. It was also an opportunity to influence the values and approach of the MSO. Resurgence has had a very kind of egalitarian approach to physicians, meaning our physiatrists are treated the same as surgeons. Spine and joint surgeons are treated the same as hand and foot and ankle surgeons. And so that was very important to keep that culture, and being the first in platform group allowed us to do that. As I've mentioned a couple of times, diversity is a core value for us, and we wanted to make sure our PE partner had that. Now, some of the drawbacks of being that, platform group are the ground floor. And Dana kind of alluded to the fact that, sometimes you may think you're a great platform and it turns out that you're not, and nobody is going to bolt on. Now, that wasn't the case with us. We were able to have people kind of bolt on. Dana, feel free to chime in. But being also the first kind of platform group was that, I believe having a 95 position partner and established position leadership, I think we had an ability to grow, made us a desirable partner. And we did, because we did have bolt-on or tuck-ins, as you may say. And that's when a practice will join that, platform group Resurgence in the MSO in the same geographic area, or some instances, the tuck-in will kind of fold into the platform group because they have best practices. Maybe we have back office functions like revenue cycle management that is going well and they want to join in on that. But it's important to consider from both sides, whether it's you're going to bolt on or you're the platform group bringing in a bolt on, that they have the same culture, patient care philosophy, a good brand reputation, and there is that all important word of alignment.
Agreed. No, I agree 100% with what Dr. Stewart said. The only thing I will add, I mean, a platform is basically the first institutional investment. So a private equity firm, since it is that first initial investment, it's going to be, you know, in this case, a large single specialty group that has a well-functioning infrastructure in place of all the things Dr. Stewart just said. And the idea is that the private equity firm and the platform will then, in conjunction, go embark on an inorganic growth initiative, adding on additional smaller clinics that maybe don't have the leadership team, don't have the infrastructure, don't have the ability to capitalize their growth, but they could add to that platform's growth. And you'll hear it, you know, you'll hear it tuck in, bolt on, you know, smaller acquisition, but it's all the same thing. It basically means that the smaller groups will accelerate the overall growth of the platform initiative, in that they basically are partnering with a more professionally well-managed, well-capitalized regional platform. So, you know, could they get there themselves? Maybe, but this gives them a 1 + 1 = 10, and that they get to bolt on to a more sophisticated leadership team and systems in place infrastructure.
You know, one of the things when we were going through this process ourselves, and I suspect, you know, it can be a challenge for some groups, is that I think for a lot of the physicians in our group, and maybe even our leadership to an extent, you know, and I understand it's an important part of the due diligence process, but I think for some people it can seem a little bit intrusive, you know, or invasive at first. You know, there's not everybody's necessarily willing to, you know, kind of allow that peek behind the curtain, if you will. But Dana, you kind of mentioned, and Gary, all went through this as well, but you kind of mentioned the importance of that process. Is that a pretty normal feeling to have for, you know, a group of physicians that are going through this process?
Absolutely. Absolutely, Bryan. I mean, I think especially if you're an independent practice that hasn't gone through this before. I mean, one, you know, even if you don't go all the way through the process, it will strengthen the way you look at your business, because you see how an outside party or entity values your business, and you may hold in high regard a certain ancillary that really in the overall valuation doesn't mean as much as you think it does, but you're emotionally attached to it. I think also, you know, I'm going through a handful of situations right now where the records that were kept in the practice just weren't as buttoned up as you would want if you were going through a complete diligence process. You know, there's a contract that you think you have, or an employee agreement that you thought you kept. And it really, all of a sudden you start realizing that maybe things aren't as well oiled, not in a bad way. You can always put your hand on it, but you know, really having those right systems. And it does feel very intrusive, because now you're under a time-bound commitment to turn around data. And frankly, you're showing your inside politics, your inside baseball to somebody from the outside who may or may not move forward, and you may or not move forward. So it can feel incredibly intrusive. It's less intrusive if you have your record. All the things that make you a good business already are going to make your diligence process a lot easier. But it's just until you're kind of under the gun, you know, it's like we all want to clean that one junk drawer in our house until we actually have to. And then you take that rainy day and actually do it. But it's that kind of thing that at the end, it makes physician alignment happen. It makes you have to find all your contractual terms. It makes you look at your payer strategies under a time-bound situation, which of course, you know, if you had 10 years to do it, not so stressful. If you have a year to do it, more stressful. And so I think that's where all of a sudden, you know, especially when you're practicing full time, this just isn't something that you're leaving a lot of extra energy or time for. And it does take a lot of time, energy, and effort, but you always get better. I mean, having somebody look from the outside in at how you're running your business just gives you a very unique lens into where those valuation levers can be long term.
And
Well,
it really
Dana,
is an eye-opening. Sorry, Marnie, but it really is an eye-opening experience when you take your practice through something like this. Because to Dina's point, like she said, you know, you might not know that the ancillary revenue you think is doing well isn't actually doing that well, or you might be underestimating how well one part of your business is doing or where a great opportunity might be. So what some practices have found that I've talked to over, throughout the country is that they didn't actually make the deal with the private equity group. It didn't work out for them, not for a negative reason, just wasn't the right deal for them. But they learned a ton about their own practice and actually were able to optimize some things that they hadn't ever made themselves look at before. They found that missing button in the bottom of their junk drawer. You know what I mean? Like when they finally cleaned it out. It's one of those things that you'd be amazed at how good this exercise can be for your practice, but be prepared to, be looking in the mirror and not always like what you see, and sort of just be ready to recognize that this is your business and you need to understand that it's complicated and you might find great things and not so great things when you look into it.
No, that's exactly right. I mean, it's timing, it's appetite to bring on a capital partner, it's understanding of your market dynamics in your region. There's just a lot that goes into this, but I think that, getting educated around it, when you think about the number of platforms in the orthopedic space, it's not something that's going away. So it behooves everyone to at least understand the process. And, at best, it makes your business better. At worst, you kind of decide you're going to continue the course you're on. But absolutely, 100% agree with that. I think the other thing, just for the edification, because I think Dr. Ask brought up a good point, but also I find, the strength of the leadership team, not just the physician leadership, but a lot of times in due diligence or when we're looking at platform groups or even bolt-on groups, really looking at the leadership team and saying, are they really as good as we think they are? Or if we were going to take this to the next level, where are the gaps in our scalability? Sometimes the CEO that was with you when you were a 10-person group isn't the CEO that's going to take you to being a 200-person group, and it's just skill set reliant. So I think that's the other piece that a lot of times comes out in diligence is just the level of sophistication of the people that are leading the ship alongside of the clinical physicians.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you, everyone. This has been a great discussion. And to the points made earlier, I'm hoping that the audience hearing, a mixture of surgeons that will most likely never partner with PE, surgeons that have partnered with PE, and surgeons that sit down at the table actively and talk about various things with them, feel a little bit more comfortable just hearing some of the jargon. Please, for everyone, refer in the show notes. Dana Jacoby has provided 8 phases of the diligence process. That way, to Dr. Springer's point, you're maybe prepared for them and it doesn't feel as intrusive when they ask for them during the due diligence and confirmatory diligence. Thank you so much. And to our amazing faculty, phenomenal discussion. Thank you again for listening in. We hope you enjoyed the discussion with our FPA faculty. If you'd like to learn more about our mission or upcoming events, please visit our website at www.buildingasuccessfulpractice.org.